Welcome to GoReadling Bedtime Stories, presented by GoReadling.com. Personalized education and reading skills for kids. Find a comfortable spot. Close your eyes, take a slow, deep breath, and let our story carry you gently off to sleep. Tonight's story is called The Elves and the Shoemaker. Once upon a time, in a small, cozy town nestled beside a winding river, lived a kind shoemaker and his dear wife. The shoemaker had hands that were strong and clever, always busy cutting and stitching the finest leather. He loved the rich smell of his workshop, a comforting scent of leather and wood, and he took great pride in every single shoe he crafted, making sure each one was perfect. But even though he was the best shoemaker in the whole town, and everyone admired his beautiful work, he was very, very poor. Winter was creeping closer, its cold breath already frosting the window panes, and his heart was heavy with worry. He had worked so hard, day in and day out, but customers were few, and money was scarce. He looked at his workbench, usually piled high with various leathers and tools, but now it felt empty, reflecting the growing emptiness in his own pocket. A deep sigh escaped his lips, a quiet sound lost in the growing chill of the evening, as he wondered how he would manage to buy food and keep their tiny home warm through the long, dark nights ahead. His gentle wife tried to offer comforting words, but he could see the same worry reflected in her kind eyes, making his own burden feel even heavier. One frosty morning, after a particularly sleepless night, the shoemaker went to his workshop with a heavy heart. He looked at his shelves and then down at his workbench, and a deep sigh escaped him. There, on the worn wooden surface, lay only one small piece of good leather, barely enough for a single pair of shoes. It was the last piece he had, soft and supple and smelling faintly of the forest, but it represented all his remaining hope. His fingers, usually so quick and confident, now trembled slightly as he picked it up. This one pair had to be perfect, had to be strong, and had to be beautiful, for if it didn't sell, he didn't know what they would do. The cold air nipped at his ears and fingers, making him shiver, but it was the cold of worry that truly chilled him to the bone. He thought of his kind wife, her gentle smile, and the empty cupboards in their small home, and a pang of despair tightened in his chest. But still, he knew he must try. With a brave resolve, the shoemaker carefully laid the last piece of leather onto his workbench. He sharpened his shining knife until its edge gleamed, ready for precise cuts. First, he measured the leather with great care, imagining the perfect shape for a comfortable, elegant shoe. Then, with swift, practiced movements, his hands began their dance. Slice, slice went the knife, separating the supple leather into pieces for the soles, the uppers, and the heels. The rich, earthy smell of fresh-cut leather filled the quiet workshop, a scent he usually loved, but today it was mixed with a hint of sadness. He smoothed each piece, feeling its texture, dreaming of the elegant footwear it would become. He gently placed all the carefully cut pieces neatly on his workbench, ready for the morning's stitching and shaping, hoping with all his heart that some magic might come their way. Then, with a quiet click of the latch, he closed his workshop door for the night, leaving the moon to peek through the window at the waiting leather. The next morning, the shoemaker woke with a familiar knot of worry in his stomach, but he pushed it away and went straight to his workshop. He opened the door, and then he stopped. He blinked once, then twice, and rubbed his eyes, wondering if he was still dreaming. For there, on his workbench, where he had left only the cut pieces of leather, stood a perfectly finished pair of shoes. They were exquisite, the finest he had ever seen, or even imagined. The leather gleamed softly, every stitch was impossibly neat, and the soles were polished to a perfect shine. They looked as if they had been spun from moonlight and starlight, so delicate yet so strong. He picked them up, turning them over in his hands, feeling the smooth curves and the expert craftsmanship. There wasn't a single flaw, not a stitch out of place. His heart pounded with a mix of wonder and disbelief. Who could have done such a magnificent thing? He was sure he had locked the door, and no one else knew how to work with such skill. A warmth began to spread through his chest, chasing away some of the morning's chill. Just as the shoemaker was still marveling at the mysterious shoes, the workshop door creaked open, and a customer stepped inside. She was a grand lady, dressed in fine silks, and her eyes immediately fell upon the beautiful shoes on the workbench. "Oh, what exquisite craftsmanship!" she exclaimed, her voice soft with admiration. She tried them on, and they fit perfectly, feeling as light as feathers and as comfortable as a cloud. She walked around a little, her face beaming with delight. "These are truly magnificent," she declared, and without a moment's hesitation, she paid a price far higher than the shoemaker had ever dared to hope for. The shoemaker's eyes widened, and a wave of profound relief washed over him. He couldn't believe his luck. He thanked the lady warmly, his voice thick with emotion, and watched her depart with a lighter step. He rushed to tell his wife, his heart soaring with happiness, and they hugged each other tightly, a silent understanding of the miraculous turn their fortunes had taken. The warmth from the money in his hand felt like sunshine after a long, dark winter. With a lighter step and a singing heart, the shoemaker went to the bustling town market. The crisp winter air felt less sharp today, and the familiar sounds of merchants calling out their wares and children laughing seemed brighter and merrier. He went straight to the leather stall, where the rich, earthy scent always made him smile. This time, he didn't have to choose the cheapest scraps. He picked out 2 large, beautiful pieces of the finest, most supple leather he could find, enough to make 2 glorious pairs of shoes. The leather felt wonderfully smooth and strong beneath his fingertips. He paid the leather merchant with a joyful smile, feeling a quiet hope bloom in his chest. When he returned home, his dear wife met him at the door, her eyes sparkling with happiness as she saw the generous bundle of leather he carried. They shared a quiet, knowing look, a silent prayer of thanks for their unseen helper, and the air in their cozy home felt lighter, filled with a new, joyful anticipation for what the next morning might bring. That evening, with a heart full of hope, the shoemaker carefully cut the 2 pieces of new leather into the necessary shapes for 2 beautiful pairs of shoes. Smooth texture and rich color of the leather, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. He made sure everything was perfectly arranged, ready for stitching, just as before. Then, with a quiet prayer of thanks whispered into the night, he closed his workshop door and went to bed, sharing a hopeful glance with his wife. The next morning, when he opened the door, his jaw dropped once more. There, sitting proudly on his workbench, were not 1 but 2 perfectly finished pairs of magnificent shoes. Each one was more beautiful than the last, shining and flawless, a testament to incredible skill. His wonder deepened, and a wide smile spread across his face, chasing away any lingering shadows of doubt. This truly was a miracle, and it filled their humble home with the promise of growing prosperity. From that day forward, the wondrous pattern continued. Every evening, the shoemaker would carefully cut out the leather for several pairs of shoes, arranging the pieces neatly on his workbench. And every morning, like magic, he would find them transformed into perfectly finished, breathtakingly beautiful footwear. The shoes were always sold quickly, fetching generous prices, for their craftsmanship was unmatched by anyone in the land. The shoemaker and his wife were no longer poor. Their small home, once chilly and quiet, now hummed with warmth and the comforting sense of good food cooking. They bought soft new blankets for their bed and a sturdy table for their meals. The shoemaker's reputation grew far and wide, and people traveled from distant villages just to buy his amazing shoes. They were busy, yes, but their hearts were light and full of joy, and the heavy worry that had once weighed them down had completely vanished. replaced by a quiet sense of peace and gratitude for their mysterious, unseen benefactors. As the days grew shorter and the wind began to howl around the eaves of their little house, winter truly settled in. Outside, the world was a canvas of frosty white, with snowflakes dancing in the crisp air and ice crystals decorating every window pane. The river outside their town slowed its flow, hinting at a deep, cold sleep. But inside the shoemaker's home, it was wonderfully warm and cozy. A cheerful fire crackled in the hearth, casting dancing shadows and filling the air with the comforting smell of burning wood. Delicious stews simmered gently on the stove, warming their bellies and their spirits. The shoemaker and his wife were always well-fed and comfortably clothed, a stark contrast to the bitter cold that raged just beyond their walls. They often looked at each other, their eyes filled with unspoken gratitude, thinking of the mysterious helpers who had brought such warmth and comfort into their lives. They knew they had been blessed, and their hearts were overflowing with thanks. One evening, as the shoemaker and his wife sat by their crackling fire, the topic of their mysterious helpers came up once more. "Who do you think it is, my dear?" the wife mused, her voice soft and wondering, as she knitted a warm scarf. Such tiny, perfect stitches, such nimble work. The shoemaker thoughtfully stroked his beard, a gentle smile on his face. "I've often wondered," he replied. "Perhaps it's the moonlight spirits, or maybe even little forest folk, with hands as quick as a sparrow's wing." Their curiosity had grown from a gentle hum to a quiet, insistent question in their hearts. It wasn't about suspicion, but a deep, heartfelt desire to finally see, to understand, and most of all, to offer their sincere thanks to the kind beings who had brought such good fortune into their lives. They looked at each other, a shared spark of determination in their eyes, and an idea began to take root, a whisper of a plan forming between them. After much quiet discussion, the shoemaker and his wife made a decision. "Tonight," the wife declared softly, her eyes bright with a mixture of excitement and resolve, "we shall stay awake. We will hide and we will watch, and finally we will see our helpers." The shoemaker nodded, his heart thrumming with a hopeful anticipation he hadn't felt in a long time. They knew they had to be careful, not wanting to frighten away their kind benefactors, but simply to observe, to learn their secret, and to prepare their hearts for a proper thank you. They planned their hiding spot carefully, a place where they could see everything without being seen themselves. The moon outside was already peeking through the clouds, casting long, silvery shadows across the snow-covered rooftops, as if ready to share in their quiet, hopeful adventure. A thrill ran through them, like a tiny bell ringing in the stillness of the night, as they prepared for their secret vigil, eager to unravel the beautiful mystery that had warmed their home for so long. As dusk began to settle over the town, painting the sky in soft shades of orange and purple, the shoemaker and his wife went about their evening ritual with a new purpose. The shoemaker cut out the leather for several pairs of shoes, more than usual, laying the pieces out with extra care on his workbench, making them look as inviting as possible for their unseen guests. He straightened his tools, leaving them gleaming and ready. Then, instead of going to bed, they quietly found their chosen hiding spot. It was a snug corner behind a tall stack of leather hides and some heavy woolen coats, a perfect place to peer out without being noticed. The workshop grew dark, lit only by a faint sliver of moonlight filtering through the dusty window panes, making the room seem even more mysterious. The air grew colder as the night deepened, but they huddled together, their hearts beating a soft rhythm of anticipation and courage, settling in for a long, silent wait, barely daring to breathe. The clock on the wall seemed to tick slower than ever, each moment stretching into an eternity as the shoemaker and his wife waited in their hiding spot. The workshop was utterly silent, save for the faint creaks and whispers of an old house settling into the night. Just as they thought their eyes might close from weariness, a tiny rustle broke the stillness. Then another, and another. Their eyes widened as they saw them. Two small, nimble figures, no bigger than a child's doll, darting into the room. They were elves, tiny and quick, with bright, curious eyes that sparkled in the faint moonlight. The shoemaker and his wife gasped silently, their hearts thumping like tiny drums against their ribs. The elves were completely bare, their skin gleaming softly in the dim light, and they moved with an astonishing speed and grace, as if they were made of pure moonlight and mischief. They seemed utterly unbothered by the cold, their tiny forms radiating an inner warmth. With astonishing agility, the two tiny elves leaped onto the shoemaker's sturdy workbench. Their small hands, so quick and precise, immediately found the tools the shoemaker had laid out. A miniature hammer tapped a tiny nail. A slender needle danced in and out of the leather, pulling fine thread with incredible speed. They worked in perfect harmony, a blur of motion and skill. There was no talking, just quick, knowing glances exchanged between them, tiny smiles playing on their lips as they focused on their task. The rhythmic tap-tap-tap of tiny hammers, the soft whisper of thread moving through leather, and the gentle scraping of sandpaper filled the quiet workshop, creating a magical symphony of craft. The shoemaker and his wife watched, utterly mesmerized, their eyes unable to believe the incredible sight before them. Every movement was flawless, every stitch a masterpiece, far beyond anything human hands could achieve. One pair of shoes was finished with a flourish, then another and another, until every single piece of cut leather on the workbench had been miraculously transformed. The elves worked tirelessly, their tiny fingers flying, ensuring each stitch was perfect, each seam flawless, and each piece of leather polished to a soft, inviting gleam. They were truly masters of their craft. Finally, with a triumphant shared sigh, they placed down their tools, their work complete. They stood back, their chests puffing out just a little, and admired their handiwork, their faces beaming with a profound sense of pride and joy. The shoes arrayed on the workbench looked magnificent, ready for any grand occasion. Then, as if overcome with happiness, the two tiny elves began to dance light-footedly on the workbench, a silent, joyful jig, their bare feet tapping a happy rhythm against the smooth wood, celebrating their incredible accomplishment under the watchful, adoring eyes of the shoemaker and his wife. After the little elves, full of the joy of their completed work, had danced away into the night, the shoemaker and his wife slowly emerged from their hiding spot. Their hearts were overflowing, not just with wonder at what they had witnessed, but with an immense, bubbling gratitude. The wife, with her kind and tender heart, was the first to speak. "Oh, my dear," she whispered, her voice filled with tenderness. "They are so tiny, and they had no clothes at all, not a stitch to keep them warm in this bitter winter." She pointed out how small and vulnerable their bare skin had seemed in the cold workshop. A beautiful, heartwarming idea sparked in her mind, a bright flame of thoughtfulness. "We must make them a thank you gift," she declared, her eyes shining with determination. "We will make them tiny coats and trousers and even little shoes to show them how much we appreciate their kindness. It's the least we can do for such wonderful helpers." The very next day, the shoemaker's wife set to work with a heart full of joy and gratitude. She searched through her basket of fabric scraps, carefully choosing the softest, warmest pieces she could find. A sliver of rich, deep green velvet, a piece of warm honey-colored wool, and some smooth, shiny silk. Her nimble fingers began to cut tiny patterns, imagining how each little garment would fit their small benefactors. She used her own sewing thimble to measure their smallness, giggling softly to herself as she imagined the elves wearing them. Meanwhile, the shoemaker, with his skilled and patient hands, began to craft 2 pairs of miniature shoes. He chose the finest, softest leather, stitching with tiny, delicate needles, making sure each shoe was perfect, just like the elves made their own. Their humble workshop, usually a place of quiet work, now buzzed with a new kind of warmth and loving creation, a beautiful space filled with the silent language of gratitude. When the tiny garments were finally finished, they were truly a sight to behold, so precious and perfectly formed. There were 2 little coats, one of forest green velvet and the other of warm brown wool, with tiny brass buttons that gleamed like dewdrops. There were 2 pairs of snug little trousers, 2 miniature vests, and even 2 tiny hats, all stitched with the utmost care. And the shoes, oh, the miniature shoes were simply adorable, made of the softest, most supple leather, each one a tiny masterpiece. That night, instead of hiding, the shoemaker and his wife gently arranged the clothes on the workbench. They laid out each outfit neatly, a complete little ensemble for each elf, looking like the finest doll's clothes imaginable. Then, their hearts fluttering with excited anticipation and quiet happiness, they quietly went to bed, dreaming of the joy they hoped to bring to their tiny, hard-working friends. The next morning, the shoemaker and his wife woke early, their hearts light with hope and curiosity. They tiptoed to the workshop door and peeked inside, barely daring to breathe. And there they were. The 2 tiny elves had already arrived. Their eyes were wide with surprise as they took in the beautiful array of clothes laid out on the workbench. Then their little faces broke into the most radiant smiles the shoemaker and his wife had ever seen. With joyful squeals and happy chirps, the elves picked up the tiny garments, turning them over in their hands, their bare skins shimmering with delight. They quickly slipped into their new clothes, their movements a blur of pure happiness. The little coats fit perfectly, the trousers were just right, and the tiny shoes were a dream, feeling wonderfully soft and comfortable on their tiny feet, a true gift of love and warmth. Dressed in their wonderful new finery, the 2 little elves looked absolutely magnificent. They beamed at each other, their faces alight with a mixture of wonder and pure, unadulterated joy. The soft velvet and warm wool felt so cozy against their skin, and the perfectly crafted little shoes made them feel quite grand indeed. A wave of happiness, so strong it seemed to make the very air sparkle, washed over them. They began to dance, not their quick, busy work dance, but a joyful, celebratory dance. They twirled and leaped and pirouetted around the workbench, their new clothes swishing and swaying, the tiny brass buttons on their coats catching the morning light. Their laughter, tiny and bell-like, filled the quiet workshop, a sound more beautiful than any melody the shoemaker and his wife had ever heard. It was a dance of gratitude, a dance of delight, a dance of pure, innocent happiness, shared only between them and the gentle couple who watched from the doorway, their hearts full to bursting. After their joyous celebration, filled with laughter and twirls, the 2 little elves looked around the shoemaker's workshop one last time. Their hearts were full, not with sadness, but with a deep understanding. They knew, in that quiet moment, that their work was done. They had helped the kind shoemaker and his dear wife when they needed it most, and now they had been thanked in the most wonderful, heartwarming way imaginable. With one last happy wave and a bright, knowing smile for the grateful couple watching, they danced out of the workshop door. Their tiny figures, now beautifully clothed, moved gracefully into the early morning light, disappearing into the moonlit woods as swiftly and silently as they had first appeared. They were never seen again by the shoemaker or his wife, their mysterious, helpful visit, a cherished memory, a whispered secret between them and the magic of the world. The shoemaker and his wife felt a tiny pang of wistfulness that their little helpers were gone, but it was quickly replaced by a profound sense of peace and enduring gratitude. From that day forward, the shoemaker continued to work hard, now with even greater vigor and joy. He remembered the elves' impossibly perfect stitches and their tireless dedication, inspiring him to make his own work just as fine, always striving for excellence in every pair of shoes. His business continued to thrive, even without the magical help, thanks to his own renewed skill and the excellent reputation he had earned. He remained prosperous, his shelves always filled with fine leather, and his workshop always humming with activity. But more importantly, he and his wife always remained kind and generous, remembering their own days of struggle and never forgetting the unexpected kindness that had transformed their lives, always ready to lend a helping hand to others in need. The shoemaker and his wife lived a long, happy life, filled with warmth and contentment. Their home was always cozy, their table always full, and their hearts always open to those around them. They never, ever forgot the tiny, naked elves who had helped them in their time of greatest need. Every winter, especially when the first soft snowflakes began to fall, blanketing the world in white, they would remember that magical night. They would tell the wonderful story to their grandchildren, their voices soft with affection, keeping the memory of the little helpers alive for generations to come. It was a cherished tale of unexpected kindness, of honest hard work, and of the incredible joy that comes from both receiving and giving with a grateful heart. And through their lives, they continued to spread kindness, knowing that every small act of generosity could spark its own beautiful magic in the world, just like the elves had done for them. Now, as the moon climbs high in the sky and the stars begin to twinkle like scattered diamonds across a velvet cloth, the world grows quiet and still. The air outside might whisper softly through the branches of ancient trees, a gentle lullaby for the sleeping world. But inside, everything is calm and peaceful. Imagine the kind shoemaker and his dear wife, much older now, sitting by a warm, crackling fire, perhaps knitting soft wool or simply holding hands, their faces alight with the comforting glow. They would gaze into the dancing flames, their minds filled with sweet memories of a time when magic peeked into their humble lives, a time of tiny helpers and unexpected gifts. The little shoes and clothes were long gone, danced away by their joyful owners into the starlit night. But the feeling of wonder and gratitude stayed with them, a soft, warm glow in their hearts, reminding them that kindness always finds its way back home. The gentle hum of the night outside and the rhythmic tick of an old clock inside are like a soothing melody, inviting quiet rest and the sweetest of dreams, knowing that kindness always finds its way back home. And so, my dear little one, our story of the kind shoemaker and the helpful elves comes to its gentle close for tonight. Just like the shoemaker and his wife found their happy ending, filled with warmth and gratitude, may your dreams be filled with the most wonderful wonders and the deepest, most peaceful slumber. The world around you is now quiet, tucked in just like you are, ready for a night of rest. Feel the soft blankets around you, the gentle comfort of your pillow beneath your head, and let your body relax completely. Close your eyes, let your breath grow slow and steady, like the soft whisper of the wind through the leaves outside your window. Drift off to a place where all your thoughts are soft and lovely, where stars twinkle just for you in the velvet sky. You are safe, you are warm, and you are so very loved. Sweet dreams, my precious one. May your sleep be deep and restful, bringing you energy and joy for tomorrow's new adventures. Good night. Good night.
And that is the end of our story. Thank you for listening to GoReadling Bedtime Stories. Visit GoReadling.com for more stories, reading adventures, and fun learning for kids. Sweet dreams, little one. Good night.